Two brothers walk toward the center of an empire. They carry no army, they command no palace guard, they possess no political office. One of them once fled this land because its leaders intended to kill him. Now he is returning to the same ruler, entering the same system, and speaking about the same oppressed people whose suffering had once driven him to act without enough control. But this time, Prophet Musa is not returning alone. His brother, Prophet Harun, walks with him, and the command they carry is not a request for personal protection. It is a demand that Pharaoh recognize a Lord above himself and release the children of Israel from oppression. What happens when truth enters a palace built to make one man appear unquestionable? What happens when a ruler believes that he controls not only people's work, movement, and safety, but even their right to believe? And what kind of courage allows a person to stand in that room without becoming cruel, reckless, or silent? Welcome to the Guided Hour, where every journey carries a story and every story carries guidance. Today, we follow Prophet Musa and Prophet Harun as they stand before Pharaoh, confront a system of fear, and witness a group of magicians discover a freedom that power could not take away. Before Musa and Harun entered the confrontation, Allah gave them instructions about how to carry it. Musa and his brother were told to go with the signs entrusted to them. They were told not to weaken in remembering Allah. They were commanded to approach Pharaoh because he had crossed all limits, and remarkably, they were instructed to speak to him gently so that he might take warning or develop fear of Allah. This instruction must be understood carefully. Gentle speech did not mean a weak message. Musa and Harun were not sent to congratulate Pharaoh. They were not asked to hide the oppression of the children of Israel. They were not told to describe tyranny with language so soft that responsibility disappeared. They were to communicate a direct truth in a manner that left the door of reflection open. This distinction matters. Some people confuse gentleness with avoidance. They believe that speaking gently means refusing to name wrongdoing. Others confuse courage with aggression. They believe that if a message is true, harshness automatically makes it stronger. The mission of Musa and Harun rejects both errors. The content would be clear. Pharaoh had transgressed. The children of Israel were to be released. Allah alone was the Lord above every ruler, yet the manner would not begin with personal abuse or uncontrolled rage. Truth does not need cruelty in order to remain truth. And gentleness does not require surrendering the truth. The two brothers were entering an environment in which a careless word could carry consequences. Pharaoh did not govern through ordinary accountability. He possessed the machinery of punishment. He had already weakened an entire people, divided society, and allowed the killing of infant sons. Musa knew this. His fear was not imaginary. He and Harun expressed concern that Pharaoh might move against them quickly or increase his transgression. The Quran does not conceal this fear. It does not present the prophets as people whose bodies never react to danger. It presents them as people who recognize danger and still obey Allah. This is an important correction to the way courage is often described. Courage is not always a feeling of confidence. Sometimes courage begins while the chest feels tight. Sometimes the mind understands exactly what could go wrong. Sometimes the danger is real, the opponent is powerful, and the person still takes the next faithful step. Musa had already asked Allah to expand his chest, ease his task, and make his speech understandable. He had asked for Harun because his brother communicated more fluently. Now the brothers acknowledged another need. They needed reassurance. Allah told them not to fear. He was with them, hearing and seeing. Consider what this assurance changed and what it did not change. Pharaoh still had a palace. He still had officials. He still had the ability to threaten. The brothers were not promised that the conversation would become comfortable. They were not told that Pharaoh would respond with humility. They were not told that obedience would remove every difficulty from the path ahead. The reassurance addressed a deeper fear. They would not enter the room unseen. Every word would be heard. Every response would be known. Every attempt at manipulation would remain visible before Allah. When a person enters a threatening environment, one of the most painful experiences is the feeling of being alone before a system too large to resist. The room may contain people, but no ally. The institution may possess procedures, but no justice. The authority may demand an answer while refusing to hear the truth. The assurance given to Musa and Harun reminds the believer that human isolation is not complete isolation. This does not remove the obligation to prepare. It does not mean a person should enter danger without wisdom. Musa had prepared through dua, signs, clear instruction, and partnership, but after preparation comes the moment when the person must act. The brothers moved toward Pharaoh. The Quran preserves their confrontation across several passages. Each passage directs our attention toward a different part of the encounter. Together, they show a ruler moving repeatedly away from the central truth placed before him. Musa and Harun carried a message from the Lord of all worlds. They demanded that the children of Israel be allowed to leave with them. They warned that peace and safety belonged to those who followed guidance, and that rejecting the signs of Allah carried consequences. The demand was both spiritual and practical. Pharaoh was called to recognize the authority of Allah. He was also commanded to release the people he oppressed. Faith was not presented as an idea that allowed injustice to continue untouched. The claim that Allah is Lord directly challenged Pharaoh's treatment of human beings as though their lives belonged to him. A ruler cannot sincerely recognize the Lord of all worlds while continuing to behave as though the weak were created for his ownership. Theological arrogance and political oppression were connected. Pharaoh's treatment of the children of Israel revealed what he believed about himself. He acted as if he had the right to decide which families would continue, which children would live, and which community would remain permanently weak. Musa and Harun did not enter asking for a private religious accommodation inside the existing system. They demanded liberation. Pharaoh did not begin by answering the demand. He turned toward Musa's personal history. Had Musa not been raised within their household as a child? Had he not remained among them for years? Had he not committed the act they remembered? The ruler moved the conversation away from the oppressed people and toward the messenger's past. This tactic remains familiar. When a message threatens power, the powerful may avoid the message by attacking the credibility, gratitude, or history of the person carrying it. You benefited from this institution. You once worked here. You accepted our support. You made a mistake years ago. Who are you to criticize us now? Pharaoh attempted to transform care received during childhood into a permanent debt of silence. He presented Musa's years within the palace as though they erased the oppression occurring outside it. But Musa's survival in Pharaoh's household did not make Pharaoh's policies just. The ruler could point to one child who was raised near privilege while ignoring the children killed by the system he commanded. This is how power sometimes uses individual exception to deny structural injustice. One person succeeded, therefore the system must be fair. One member of the oppressed community entered the palace, therefore the community cannot be oppressed. One act of support is displayed, while thousands of acts of harm are hidden. The story requires us to examine the difference between personal benefit and moral obligation. A person may have benefited from an organization and still be responsible for naming its wrongdoing. Gratitude for genuine help does not require loyalty to injustice. Musa did not deny the years he had spent among them. Neither did he accept the conclusion Pharaoh wanted to draw from those years. Pharaoh also raised the death that had occurred before Musa fled Egypt. Musa responded without inventing innocence. He acknowledged that he had committed the act while mistaken. He explained that he fled because he feared them. He then spoke about the guidance and messengerhood Allah had granted him. This response is remarkable because it avoids two opposite forms of dishonesty. Musa did not deny the past. He had already turned to Allah in Tawbah. He had recognized that he wronged himself. Repentance had not required rewriting history, but Musa also refused to let Pharaoh use a forgiven and transformed past as permanent ownership over his future. Accountability and manipulation are not the same thing. A person who has made a serious mistake should acknowledge it, seek forgiveness, repair what can be repaired, and change direction. But another person does not gain the right to use that mistake forever as a weapon against every truthful action. There are institutions that preserve old failures not because they care about justice, but because those failures are useful for control. The moment an employee speaks about misconduct, an old performance problem is suddenly remembered. The moment a community member challenges an abuse, personal imperfections are presented as evidence that the abuse should remain unexamined. The moment someone changes direction, others insist that the person can never become anything beyond the worst moment of the past. Musa's response shows another way. Acknowledge what is true, do not accept what is false, do not defend the mistake. Do not allow the mistake to become permission for continuing oppression. Then Pharaoh attempted to describe raising Musa as a favor that should silence him. Musa turned the argument back toward the reality Pharaoh excluded. Was this favor supposed to erase the fact that Pharaoh had enslaved and oppressed the children of Israel? The child had entered the palace because an entire community lived under danger. Pharaoh wanted credit for raising the very child endangered by his own system. Power often asks to be praised for solving a small part of the problem it created. It demands gratitude for offering shelter from the storm while refusing to acknowledge who opened the roof. It presents limited mercy as proof that widespread injustice does not exist. Musa refused the framing. The central issue remained. Pharaoh had transgressed. The children of Israel were oppressed, and authority belonged to Allah. Pharaoh then asked about the Lord of all worlds. The question may sound like a request for information, but the surrounding exchange shows resistance. Musa answered by directing attention beyond Pharaoh's palace. The Lord of the heavens, the earth, and everything between them. The Lord connected to every generation, including the people of the past. The Lord of the east, the west, and everything between them. Each answer dismantled Pharaoh's attempt to place himself at the center of reality. Pharaoh possessed a territory. Allah is Lord of the heavens and earth. Pharaoh ruled during one period. Allah was Lord of the people before him and the generations after him. Pharaoh could face one direction from his throne. Allah is Lord of the east and west. The scale of the answers exposed the smallness of Pharaoh's claim. A palace can feel like the entire world to those trapped inside it. A ruler surrounded by approval can begin to believe that the boundaries of his court are the boundaries of truth. Musa kept expanding the field of vision. Look above the palace, look beyond the borders, look before your birth, look toward the world after your death. The one who rules temporarily is not the Lord of existence. Pharaoh responded by turning toward those around him. He attempted to make Musa appear unreasonable. He described him in a way intended to separate him from the audience. This is another method of narrative control. When a ruler cannot answer the content, he may speak around the messenger rather than to him. Can you hear what this person is saying? Does this not sound strange? Should someone like this be taken seriously? The audience is invited to evaluate social acceptability instead of evidence. Pharaoh's officials were not merely listening to a theological discussion. They were observing the ruler's reaction and learning which conclusion would preserve their place near him. In such environments, people often study the leader's face before deciding what they believe. Truth becomes socially expensive. Agreement becomes professionally useful. A question that should be answered honestly becomes a loyalty test. Musa did not allow the ridicule to change the subject. He continued directing attention toward the Lord beyond Pharaoh's authority. Pharaoh then threatened imprisonment if Musa recognized any object of worship other than him. The threat revealed the weakness hidden beneath the performance of certainty. A person confident in the truth of his position can answer evidence. A ruler who must imprison the person asking the question has begun to expose the fragility of his claim. Pharaoh did not possess a better explanation of the heavens and earth. He possessed a prison. Coercion became the substitute for proof. This remains a central difference between authority and truth. Authority can control access. It can control employment. It can control public platforms. It can punish bodies. It can demand official language. But authority cannot transform falsehood into truth. It can only raise the cost of saying otherwise. Musa asked whether Pharaoh would consider a clear sign. Pharaoh demanded that it be produced if Musa was truthful. Musa cast the staff. By the command of Allah, it became a manifest serpent. Musa also drew forth his hand, and it appeared brilliantly clear to those observing, without disease. We do not need to add fantasy descriptions to the signs. We do not need to imagine enormous creatures, invented colors, or reactions the Quran does not record. The point is clear. Pharaoh demanded evidence. Evidence was presented, and the appearance of evidence did not produce humility. Pharaoh turned to the officials around him and described Musa as a skilled magician. The same event that could have become an opening toward belief was renamed as a threat. This is where the confrontation becomes a study of motivated reasoning. Not every rejection of evidence occurs because evidence is unavailable. Sometimes evidence is rejected because accepting it would require surrendering a protected identity, position, or system of advantage. Pharaoh could not accept the sign without accepting that Musa carried authority from a lord above him. That would mean the children of Israel were not his property. That would mean his political order was morally accountable. That would mean the throne did not define reality. So the sign was not evaluated only as evidence. It was evaluated as danger. Pharaoh and his officials argued that Musa intended to remove people from their land through magic. The issue was transformed again. The messenger demanding freedom for an oppressed community was described as the aggressor. The ruler who had divided society now warned that Musa would disrupt society. The power that had removed security from others presented itself as the protector of security. The person asking that captives be released was accused of trying to take the country away. This reversal remains one of propaganda's most effective tools. Describe resistance to injustice as the true injustice. Describe accountability as instability. Describe reform as destruction. Describe the demand for freedom as a plot against the public. The goal is to make people fear the solution more than the harm already surrounding them. Pharaoh's officials advised delaying action against Musa and Harun, while messengers were sent throughout the cities to gather every skilled magician. The ruler had decided to answer the signs with a public competition. He would use specialists. He would use a crowd. He would use ceremony. He would transform a moral and theological confrontation into a spectacle managed by the state. This decision reveals how power can use expertise. The magicians were not initially gathered to conduct an independent investigation. They were summoned to protect Pharaoh's conclusion. The ruler had already declared what Musa was, a magician. The experts were expected to produce a performance that confirmed the label. Their role was not to follow evidence wherever it led. Their role was to defend the institution that paid them. The magicians arrived and asked Pharaoh whether they would receive a reward if they prevailed. Pharaoh confirmed that they would. More than payment was offered. They would become among those brought near to him. Money and proximity, compensation and access. The magicians understood the political value of victory. Defeating Musa would not merely demonstrate professional skill, it would move them closer to the ruler. This detail exposes the incentives surrounding the public event. Pharaoh's system did not rely only on fear, it also relied on reward. Tyranny can punish enemies, but it also promotes useful supporters. A person may serve falsehood not because he believes every claim, but because falsehood offers a career. Access to powerful rooms can become more important than intellectual honesty. The professional begins asking what conclusion will be rewarded. The advisor learns which data should remain outside the presentation. The expert recognizes which answer secures the next contract. The communicator understands which story earns proximity. The magicians entered the event openly seeking reward from Pharaoh. The Quran does not hide their original motivation. They expected to win. They expected payment. They expected access. At the beginning of that day, professional skill was aligned with political ambition, but the story would not end with the motivations with which they arrived. This is important. A person may enter a room for the wrong reason and still leave transformed by the truth encountered there. Past ambition does not make recognition impossible. Compromise does not have to become permanent identity. Professional expertise can be captured by power, but it can also become the means through which a person recognizes what power wants hidden. The contest was arranged for a public day when people would gather in the morning. Pharaoh wanted witnesses. A private confrontation might leave room for uncertainty. A public victory could be used to restore the ruler's narrative. The event would display the state's specialists defeating the outsider described as a threat. The crowd would see. The palace would define the meaning. The result would become a message to the entire society. This is how spectacle works. It does not only attempt to settle a question, it attempts to control how people remember the question. The staging, timing, participants, and audience are selected to create a conclusion before the event begins. The magicians gathered and discussed the confrontation. The Quran records that they spoke privately and organized their plan. They described Musa and Harun as magicians who intended to remove people from their land and eliminate their established way. Pharaoh's framing had moved through the professional community. The accusation was repeated. The danger was amplified. The brothers were no longer simply messengers presenting signs. They had been turned into a threat to national identity. This is another feature of propaganda. A ruler's claim becomes more persuasive when other people repeat it. Soon the narrative no longer sounds like the ruler's defense. It sounds like public consensus. The magicians were urged to organize their method and arrive in a unified line. Success that day would belong to whoever gained the upper hand. The language of truth had been replaced by the language of winning. Who would prevail? Who would dominate the image? Who would control the crowd? Who would leave with the reward? A competition can quietly change the purpose of communication. Instead of asking what is true, the participants ask who appeared stronger. Instead of examining the evidence, the audience watches performance. Instead of allowing correction, each side feels pressure to protect identity. But Musa and Harun had not come to build a personal brand. They had come with a message. Their success would not be measured by applause. It would be measured by faithful delivery and the truth Allah made clear. Before the public display, Musa warned the magicians not to fabricate falsehood against Allah, lest punishment overtake them. Even here, he did not treat them as people beyond guidance. They had arrived to oppose him. They had accepted Pharaoh's framing. They expected reward for defeating him, yet Musa warned them. The warning gave them an opportunity to reconsider. This is part of the prophetic manner. Opposition does not automatically remove concern for the opponent's moral future. Musa did not need the magicians to be humiliated for his ego. He needed the truth to become clear. There is a difference between wanting falsehood to end and wanting the people carrying falsehood to be destroyed. A person may oppose what another is doing while still hoping that the person recognizes the truth. This balance prevents moral confrontation from becoming personal hatred. Musa's mission was not about defeating individuals for entertainment. It was about calling human beings away from worshipping power and toward the worship of Allah. The magicians faced a decision. They could proceed as servants of Pharaoh's narrative, or they could consider the warning and evidence honestly. At first, they continued. They asked Musa whether he would cast first or allow them to cast. Musa permitted them to begin. The magicians threw their ropes and staffs. They invoked Pharaoh's might and expressed confidence that they would prevail. The Quran tells us that they affected the eyes of the people, frightened them, and produced a great display of magic. Their ropes and staffs appeared to move. The scene was designed to overwhelm perception. The crowd saw movement. The specialists understood technique. Pharaoh saw the performance he expected, and Musa experienced fear within himself. The Quran tells us this directly. Musa felt fear. The presence of Harun did not eliminate every feeling. The previous signs did not turn Musa into someone incapable of anxiety. The assurance of Allah did not mean the human heart never reacted to an intense public display. Faith is not emotional numbness. A person may possess Iman and still experience a physical response to danger, confusion, or the possibility that others may be deceived. What matters is what follows the feeling. Fear entered Musa's heart. Fear did not determine his obedience. Allah reassured him that he would have the upper hand. He was commanded to cast what was in his right hand. What the magicians had produced was a trick, and such magic would not achieve lasting success. Musa cast the staff. By the command of Allah, it consumed what they had produced. The false display collapsed. The crowd had seen something designed to appear alive. Now the sign given to Musa overcame it. The magicians understood what they had created. They knew the boundaries of their craft. They knew the preparation behind the ropes and staffs. They knew what illusion could do to perception. And when Musa's sign overcame their work, they recognized that they were not witnessing another performance of the same kind. This recognition is identified in established tafsir as arising from their expertise. The people most qualified to understand the limits of magic were the magicians themselves. Their knowledge, which Pharaoh intended to use against the truth, became part of how they recognized it. Expertise is morally powerful when the expert is willing to admit where the field ends. A skilled person knows not only what can be done, but what cannot be honestly explained by the techniques available. The honest expert says, "I know this craft. This is not what we did." The dishonest expert says, "My employer has already announced the conclusion." The magicians now faced the greatest professional integrity test of their lives. Pharaoh had promised reward. The entire public event had been organized for his victory. Their careers, access, and safety depended on supporting his narrative. They could have remained silent. They could have described the result as an unexpected technique. They could have requested additional time. They could have protected themselves with complicated language. They could have agreed privately while preserving public loyalty. Instead, the magicians fell into prostration. They declared belief in the Lord of all worlds, the Lord of Musa and Harun. The wording was direct. They did not leave the identity of the Lord vague enough for Pharaoh to claim that they still meant him. They named their connection to the message of the two brothers. This was not only a change of private opinion, it was a public transfer of allegiance. The people whom Pharaoh had recruited to defeat Musa became witnesses supporting the truth Musa carried. The specialists hired to protect the ruler's image became the first people in the event to abandon it. The display intended to strengthen Pharaoh exposed the limits of his power. He could assemble experts. He could offer payment. He could promise access. He could organize the crowd. He could determine the mourning. He could choose the location. But he could not control what honest expertise recognized. And once the magicians recognized the truth, Pharaoh discovered that he could not control their prostration. The movement of their bodies carried a meaning beyond politics. They lowered themselves before Allah while refusing to lower their conscience before the ruler. In the beginning of the event, they invoked Pharaoh's might. By the decisive moment, they recognized the Lord of Musa and Harun. The distance between those two declarations was not measured in years. It occurred within one public encounter. This is why no person should be reduced permanently to the motivation with which the person entered the room. The magicians entered seeking reward from Pharaoh. They left seeking forgiveness from Allah. They entered wanting proximity to political power. They left willing to lose that proximity. They entered as instruments of the ruler's spectacle. They left as witnesses against his claim. A human being can change quickly when truth becomes clear and pride no longer blocks recognition. But transformation requires honesty. The magicians could have protected their status by denying what they knew. They chose to protect truth instead. Pharaoh reacted immediately. He did not ask why the experts had changed their conclusion. He did not request an explanation of the technical difference between their performance and Musa's sign. He did not allow the people he had publicly recognized as skilled to exercise independent judgment. He asked how they could believe before he gave them permission. The sentence reveals the full shape of his tyranny. Pharaoh believed that even belief required authorization from him. The magicians' minds, consciences, and worship were treated as territory under the ruler's control. They had been allowed to perform. They had not been allowed to conclude. They had been permitted to use expertise. They had not been permitted to follow where expertise led. Pharaoh wanted specialists, but not independent judgment. He wanted knowledge without conscience. He wanted performance without truth. He wanted people close to power, provided that closeness replaced moral freedom. This remains a danger wherever authority rewards expertise only while it produces approved conclusions. A leader may claim to value honest analysis, but punish every result that challenges the strategy already chosen. An institution may invite feedback, but treat disagreement as betrayal. A government may celebrate scholarship, but demand that scholars never question the official narrative. A community may praise knowledge while silencing anyone whose evidence makes the powerful uncomfortable. Pharaoh's question exposes the arrangement. You were allowed to work. You were not allowed to believe differently. The magicians had crossed the boundary from useful employees to independent moral agents. Pharaoh responded by creating a conspiracy theory. Musa must have been their chief teacher. They must have planned the event together. The public recognition of truth was reinterpreted as a coordinated plot. This accusation had no established basis in the revealed account, but it served Pharaoh's need. If the magicians had honestly recognized the sign, then Pharaoh's position had been defeated by his own experts. If they were conspirators, then the ruler could dismiss the evidence and punish betrayal. Conspiracy protected the throne from self-examination. This pattern also remains recognizable. When credible insiders challenge a powerful institution, the institution may avoid the evidence by attacking coordination. They were influenced, they were recruited, they are part of a campaign, they never truly belonged. Their conclusion is not genuine. The purpose is to make moral change appear impossible. Anyone who changes must have been manipulated. Anyone who speaks must be controlled by an enemy. Anyone who recognizes wrongdoing must secretly hate the group. Pharaoh could not imagine that people standing near him might freely recognize that he was wrong. Then came the threats. Pharaoh threatened severe physical punishment and execution. The Quran preserves the threat clearly, but this family-friendly telling does not need graphic detail. The important point is that Pharaoh escalated from reward to terror. Before the contest, he offered money and proximity. After the magicians changed allegiance, he offered pain and death. This is the complete structure of coercive power. Reward those who serve the narrative, threaten those who leave it. Make public examples of both groups. The magicians had gained the proximity they once sought, but in the worst possible form. Pharaoh's attention was now fully directed toward them. The reward disappeared. The palace became a place of threat. The ruler who had promised advancement now promised destruction. What changed? Not the magician's skill, not their ability to observe. What changed was their loyalty. Power that appears generous while receiving obedience may become violent when obedience ends. The magicians answered with a freedom Pharaoh did not understand. They stated that they would not prefer Pharaoh over the clear proofs that had reached them and over the one who created them. They told him to decide whatever he intended within the limits of worldly life. They expressed hope that their Lord would forgive their sins and the magic they had been compelled or encouraged to practice. They recognized that Allah is better and more enduring. Across the Quranic retellings, their response communicates the same transformation. Pharaoh's power was temporary. Allah's judgment was lasting. Pharaoh could act within this world. He could not control the next. Pharaoh could threaten their bodies. He could not become their creator. Pharaoh could remove the reward he had offered. He could not remove the forgiveness they sought from Allah. The ruler's threat remained serious. The believers did not pretend otherwise, but the scale had changed. Before the sign, they measured success through payment and proximity. After the sign, they measured life through forgiveness and the final return to Allah. The same threat looks different when the standard of value changes. If Pharaoh is the highest reality, losing his favor means losing everything. If Allah is the Lord of all worlds, Pharaoh's favor is temporary and morally limited. This is the freedom of Iman. It does not mean political power disappears. It means political power loses the ability to define ultimate meaning. The ruler may say, "Your life belongs to me." The believer knows life was created by Allah. The ruler may say, "Your future depends on my approval." The believer knows every human future ends before the judgment of Allah. The ruler may say, "I will decide what you are allowed to believe." The believer knows that conscience cannot honestly be outsourced. The magicians also turned toward Allah with dua. They asked for patience to be poured upon them and for their lives to end in faithful submission. They did not ask to become famous for courage. They did not celebrate themselves. They understood that recognizing truth was not the end of the test. Now they needed sabr to remain with it. This is another essential part of transformation. A moment of clarity can occur quickly. Living according to that clarity may demand sustained courage. A person may recognize corruption during one meeting. The next test arrives when the promotion is threatened. A person may understand that a relationship is abusive. The next test arrives when leaving creates uncertainty. A person may discover that a profitable practice is dishonest. The next test arrives when income depends on stopping it. A person may accept the truth intellectually. The next test arrives when the truth becomes socially expensive. The magicians asked Allah for the inner strength required after recognition. They did not rely on the emotion of the public moment alone. A dramatic decision can feel powerful while the crowd is present. Sabr is what remains when the moment becomes painful. Their dua also returns us to Musa and Harun. The brothers entered the confrontation with fear and remembrance. The magicians left the confrontation with faith and a request for patience. The path of courage was not presented as self-generated confidence. Both groups turned toward Allah. Musa and Harun were supported before entering. The new believers sought support after recognizing the truth. Human beings need Allah at every stage, before the responsibility, during the evidence, after the decision. The person who has reached the right conclusion still needs help remaining faithful to it. If this episode is helping you see these events with greater clarity, take a moment to like this episode, subscribe to the Guided Hour, and share it with someone who may benefit. Your support helps more families discover thoughtful and reliable Islamic storytelling. Now let us return to what changed in that public courtyard. Pharaoh had arranged the gathering to prove control. By the end of the contest, the limits of that control were visible. He controlled the invitation, but not the conclusion. He controlled the reward, but not the conscience. He controlled the threat, but not the meaning the believers gave to sacrifice. He controlled the official story, but not what the experts had recognized. This does not mean Pharaoh's regime ended that morning. The oppression continued. Further signs would come. The children of Israel would continue facing difficulty. Musa and Harun's mission was far from complete. Truth becoming visible does not always cause false power to disappear immediately. Sometimes evidence produces repentance. Sometimes it produces escalation. Pharaoh chose escalation. This is one reason people can feel confused after speaking truth. They expect that clear evidence will produce an immediate institutional correction. They assume that once the facts are undeniable, everyone will behave responsibly. But powerful systems are not governed only by information. They are governed by incentives, identity, fear, hierarchy, and protected interests. Pharaoh's problem was not simply lack of data. He had seen the signs. His experts had changed their conclusion in public. The evidence threatened the structure through which he understood himself. Accepting the truth would mean accepting accountability. So he increased his resistance. This distinction helps us understand why patience is necessary in reform. Evidence matters, clear communication matters, expert testimony matters, but people may still resist because the truth carries a cost. The messenger's responsibility is faithful delivery, not control over every response. Musa and Harun did not fail because Pharaoh refused to believe. The magicians did not become irrelevant because the ruler dismissed their conclusion. Their recognition mattered even when it did not immediately remove the regime. A truthful witness is not measured only by whether the powerful person changes. The witness is measured by whether the truth was carried faithfully. There is another dimension of Harun's presence that deserves reflection. Part 1 ended with Musa requesting his brother as a partner. Musa did not ask for help because the mission was unimportant. He asked because it was too important to allow ego to weaken it. Now the brothers stood together. The Quran's account does not create a rivalry between them. Musa's signs do not make Harun unnecessary. Harun's greater fluency does not make Musa inferior. They carry one mission through complementary strengths. Healthy partnership does not require identical ability. It requires shared direction. Two leaders can possess different strengths while remaining loyal to the same truth. One may carry the original vision. Another may communicate with greater ease. One may respond quickly. Another may stabilize the room. One may understand the full strategy. Another may recognize the emotional state of the people. The problem begins when difference becomes competition. Musa had no need to reduce Harun in order to protect his own prophetic identity. Harun had no need to replace Musa in order for his contribution to matter. This is a lesson for siblings, founders, executives, community leaders, and families. A shared mission becomes stronger when people can name each other's strengths without insecurity. Musa named Harun's fluency. He requested it. He made space for it. In many organizations, the leader's greatest weakness is not lack of talent nearby. It is inability to tolerate talent nearby. A capable colleague becomes a perceived rival. A clear communicator becomes a threat. An honest advisor becomes inconvenient. The leader begins selecting people who will reinforce personal comfort rather than strengthen the mission. Pharaoh surrounded himself with officials who repeated his framing. Musa asked for a brother who possessed a strength he needed. The contrast is significant. One model of leadership gathers approval, the other gathers capability and remembrance. One model protects the leader's image, the other protects the mission's integrity. One model demands permission before belief, the other asks Allah for partnership before action. The palace and the prophetic partnership represent two completely different structures of authority. Pharaoh's authority moves downward through fear and reward. Musa and Harun's responsibility remains upwardly accountable to Allah. Pharaoh asks, "Who gave you permission?" The prophets understand that human permission cannot replace divine command. Pharaoh's people compete for proximity to him. The brothers seek closeness to Allah through remembrance. Pharaoh's system requires people to hide what they recognize. The prophetic mission invites people to follow truth even when recognition changes their lives. The magicians reveal something equally important about knowledge. Knowledge does not automatically make a person morally courageous. Before the contest, they possessed expertise. They still sought Pharaoh's reward. They still participated in a spectacle designed to support oppression. Technical knowledge and moral integrity are not identical. A person can understand a field and still use that understanding in service of falsehood. Data can be manipulated. Law can be used to protect injustice. Communication skill can spread propaganda. Technology can deepen control. Religious language can be used to excuse power. The question is not only whether a person knows. The question is what the person serves with that knowledge. But knowledge can also create responsibility. The magicians recognized something the general audience may not have understood as quickly. Their expertise gave them greater clarity. That clarity created a choice. Remain useful to Pharaoh or become truthful before Allah. The greater the understanding, the less credible the excuse. A professional who recognizes that a result is false carries a responsibility different from someone who cannot evaluate it. An analyst who understands that numbers are being misrepresented cannot hide permanently behind formatting. A physician who knows that a claim is unsafe cannot treat silence as neutrality. A religious teacher who knows that a quotation is unreliable cannot repeat it because the audience enjoys it. A leader who knows that harm is occurring cannot pretend that lack of public discussion means lack of responsibility. The magician's prostration was a professional confession as well as a spiritual one. Their previous work could not explain what they saw. They admitted it publicly. The humility to say, "This is beyond my craft," became the doorway through which their expertise served truth rather than ego. Pharaoh displayed the opposite response. He possessed political information but rejected moral meaning. The magicians possessed technical information and allowed moral meaning to change them. One group's knowledge became a path toward humility. The ruler's knowledge became material for further manipulation. The difference was not intelligence alone. It was willingness to surrender pride. The story also asks us to examine the role of the crowd. A public audience can create pressure in more than one direction. The magicians may have expected public admiration. Pharaoh expected public confirmation. Musa may have feared that people would be deceived by the illusion. Once the sign became clear, the public setting made the magician's declaration even more consequential. They could not quietly revise the report later. They responded in the moment. Modern life has multiplied public stages. A statement can travel across millions of screens. A short performance can create certainty without understanding. An edited image can appear stronger than a complete argument. A confident voice can receive more attention than careful evidence. A public debate can reward speed, mockery, and spectacle rather than truth. The contest before Pharaoh warns us not to confuse visual impact with reality. The ropes and staffs appeared to move. The display frightened people. The effect on perception was real even though the conclusion encouraged by the illusion was false. People can experience a genuine emotional reaction to manipulated information. Fear may be genuine, anger may be genuine. Excitement may be genuine, but the emotional reality of the reaction does not prove the truth of the claim that caused it. This is why evidence, expertise, patience, and moral integrity matter. The crowd saw movement. The magicians understood the technique. When the sign of Musa overcame the illusion, the experts recognized the difference. A responsible audience should learn from that moment. Do not ask only, "What did I feel when I saw this?" Ask, "What produced what I saw? Who selected the frame? What information remains outside it? Who benefits from my fear? Which experts have examined the claim? Are those experts independent, or are they waiting for Pharaoh's reward? Are they free to change their conclusion? What happens to them if they disagree?" The structure surrounding information often tells us whether truth is being sought or managed. Pharaoh did not invite magicians and promise to accept their honest assessment. He hired them to win. That is not investigation, it is production. Yet the public event also gives us hope. A staged environment does not guarantee a staged outcome. A ruler may control the platform while losing the meaning. A dishonest question may still produce an honest answer. A professional hired for the wrong purpose may still choose integrity. A person entering for reward may still leave with faith. A system may arrange the entire stage and still fail to control what truth does inside the human heart. This hope should not make us naive. The magicians faced severe consequences. Moral courage can be costly, but the story refuses to describe human beings as permanently owned by incentives. People can change, employees can refuse, experts can confess, insiders can become witnesses. Those who once supported an unjust narrative can recognize their responsibility and leave it. Repentance remains possible while life remains. The magicians did not claim that their previous involvement was harmless. They asked Allah for forgiveness. They recognized that they had practiced what was wrong. Moral change is not complete when a person says, "I have a new opinion." It includes a changed relationship with the past. The person recognizes the wrong, seeks forgiveness, stops serving it, accepts the cost of a different allegiance. This is Tobar expressed under pressure. Return to the beginning of the episode. Two brothers walked toward an empire. Musa carried a history Pharaoh intended to use against him. Harun carried a strength Musa had openly requested. Both carried a command larger than personal safety. They were told to speak gently. They were told not to weaken in remembrance. They admitted their fear. They received reassurance. Then they entered. What made them courageous? Not a belief that Pharaoh could do nothing. He could threaten. He could imprison. He could organize the state against them. Their courage came from understanding that Pharaoh could not become the Lord of all worlds. His authority was real within limits. His claim beyond those limits was false. This distinction protects the believer from two mistakes. The first is pretending that oppressive power has no effect. It does. People can be injured. Livelihoods can be lost. Families can face pressure. The magician's fear would have been understandable. The second mistake is treating oppressive power as ultimate. It is not. No ruler controls the final judgment. No employer owns the conscience. No institution can convert falsehood into truth. No public narrative can remove what Allah knows. No threat can make a human being the creator. Pharaoh's greatest demand was not that people obey a particular policy. It was that they allow him to define the boundaries of reality. Musa and Harun refused. The magicians eventually refused. That refusal is the beginning of freedom. Before the children of Israel crossed the sea, before the physical departure from Egypt, the story shows a different liberation. Human beings become free when they stop asking power for permission to recognize the truth. This does not mean every disagreement with authority is righteous. The prophets carried revelation. The magicians responded to a clear sign. A person must still examine evidence, intention, consequences, and moral responsibility carefully. Ego can disguise itself as courage. Recklessness can describe itself as resistance. Rumor can present itself as suppressed truth. The story does not invite automatic rebellion against every instruction. It invites submission to Allah above submission to human arrogance. It teaches that authority is legitimate only within moral limits. It teaches that evidence deserves honest evaluation. It teaches that past mistakes should produce repentance, not permanent silence. It teaches that gentleness and clarity can exist together. It teaches that fear can be present without becoming the decision-maker. It teaches that expertise must answer to truth rather than reward. It teaches that strong leaders ask for help. And it teaches that a person may enter the day serving falsehood and leave it standing for faith. The magician's transformation was not a small side event within Musa's story. It was a defeat of Pharaoh's understanding of the human being. Pharaoh believed people belonged to whoever paid, promoted, or threatened them. The magicians demonstrated that the human conscience can awaken. Pharaoh believed belief required his permission. They believed without it. Pharaoh believed fear would restore loyalty. They asked Allah for sabr. Pharaoh believed the world ended at the boundary of his punishment. They looked toward what is better and more enduring. The palace still stood. The ruler still threatened, but something had already changed that could not be reversed. Pharaoh no longer possessed the unquestioned world he had attempted to create. Truth had been spoken before him. His experts had recognized it, and two brothers had entered his court without surrendering the message entrusted to them. Part 3 will follow what happened when Pharaoh continued to resist. Further signs would come to the people of Egypt. Promises would be made and broken. The children of Israel would be prepared to leave. And the ruler who believed he controlled their future would pursue them toward a sea. But before that journey begins, remain for a moment in the empty courtyard after the public gathering. The ropes lie without power. The promised rewards have lost their meaning. The throne remains elevated, but its claim has become smaller, and the people Pharaoh hired to defend his authority have lowered themselves before the Lord of Musa and Harun. The deepest victory of that morning was not that one public performance defeated another. It was that human beings recognized the truth and refused to sell that recognition back to power. You have been listening to The Guided Hour, where every journey carries a story and every story carries guidance. Until our next journey, may Allah increase us in beneficial knowledge and guide us toward what is true.